Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, The Fall. Vincent Morrison had seen death before in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in the dark corners of the world where his private security work took him. But nothing had prepared him for watching his 8-year-old daughter Ruby tumble down those concrete steps at Lincoln Elementary. The sound still echoed in his mind 3 months later. The sickening crack of her spine against the corner step, her small voice calling Daddy before going silent. The doctors had been clinical in their assessment. Complete spinal cord injury, T12, L1 fracture. Ruby would never walk again. Vince had built his life around control. 6'2", with calloused hands and steel gray eyes. He'd earned his living reading people's intentions before they acted on them. His military training and 15 years in private security had taught him that survival meant staying 3 steps ahead of everyone else. But he hadn't seen this coming. She was just running to catch up with her friends. Claudia had sobbed in the hospital waiting room, her auburn hair falling across her face. The janitor must have just mopped those steps. They were so slippery. Vince had held his wife then, stroking her hair while Ruby lay unconscious in surgery. Claudia was a delicate woman, 5'4", with the kind of ethereal beauty that made strangers do double takes. She worked part-time at an art gallery, spent her afternoons painting watercolors, and had never encountered real tragedy. This would break her, Vince knew, but they'd face it together. He'd been wrong about that too. Their house in suburban Denver had been modified with ramps, wider doorways, and a specialized bathroom. Vince had liquidated his savings without hesitation. Ruby was everything to him. His bright, curious daughter who asked endless questions about his travels, who'd inherited his stubborn streak and Claudia's artistic eye. Daddy, will I really never dance again? Ruby had asked during one of her first days home, her small hands gripping the armrests of her new wheelchair. Maybe not dance the way you used to, kiddo, Vince had said, kneeling beside her chair. But we'll find new ways. You're a Morrison. We adapt and overcome. Ruby had nodded solemnly, then asked if she could paint a picture of mountains from her wheelchair. That was his girl, always looking forward, never dwelling on what was lost. Claudia, however, seemed to retreat further each day. She'd stopped painting, stopped visiting the gallery, stopped meeting Vince's eyes when he talked about Ruby's progress in physical therapy. She's just adjusting, Dr. Patricia Hernandez, Ruby's psychologist, had assured him. Sometimes parents blame themselves, especially mothers. Give her time. But Vince's instincts, honed by years of reading hostile environments, whispered that something deeper was wrong. Claudia wasn't just grieving, she was calculating. The way she looked at Ruby when she thought no one was watching, the slight tightening around her eyes when Ruby's wheelchair scraped the doorframe, the nearly imperceptible sigh when Ruby needed help transferring to her bed. His wife was seeing their daughter as a burden. Vince had confronted her one evening in their kitchen, the same kitchen where Ruby used to stand on a step stool to help make cookies. Talk to me, Claudia. What's going on in your head? She'd turned from the sink, dish towel clutched in her manicured fingers. I don't know what you mean. You barely look at her anymore. When's the last time you helped with her exercises? That's what the therapist is for. Her voice had an edge he'd never heard before. Trevor knows what he's doing. Trevor Hannigan, Ruby's physical therapist. Vince had noticed how Claudia lingered in the therapy room, how she always found reasons to be present during Trevor's visits. The man was competent, a former college athlete turned PT with easy charm and the kind of sculpted physique that came from daily gym sessions. He made Ruby laugh during her exercises, which Vince appreciated, but something about his too bright smile and the way his hand lingered on Claudia's shoulder when he left made Vince's jaw clench. She's our daughter, Claudia, not a patient. She's a constant reminder of everything that went wrong. The words erupted from her. Then she immediately pressed her hand to her mouth, eyes wide with horror at what she'd revealed. Vince had stared at his wife, really looked at her, and saw a stranger. The woman who'd once talked about having more children, who'd sung lullabies while braiding Ruby's hair, who'd called their daughter her little miracle, was gone. That night, lying in bed while Claudia pretended to sleep, Vince had made his first strategic assessment. His marriage was over. The only question was how to protect Ruby from the fallout. He'd started planning then, the way he'd planned extraction routes in Kandahar. Every variable, every contingency, every possible threat. Because Vincent Morrison had learned long ago that when someone showed you who they really were, you believed them the first time. Chapter 2. The Inheritance. The call came on a Tuesday morning in October while Vince was reviewing security protocols for a corporate client. Ruby was at her adapted school program, and Claudia had driven into the city for what she claimed was a gallery appointment. Mrs. Morrison? The voice belonged to Harold Fitzpatrick, an estate attorney from Boston. I'm calling regarding your wife's grandmother, Eleanor Pemberton. I'm afraid she passed away last week. Vince set down his coffee. He'd met Eleanor exactly twice. A formidable woman in her 90s who lived in a Beacon Hill mansion and spoke with the clipped authority of old New England money. Claudia rarely mentioned her, claiming the old woman disapproved of their middle-class life. I'm sorry for your loss, Vince said, though he wasn't sure why the attorney was calling him instead of Claudia. The funeral was yesterday, but there's the matter of the inheritance. Mrs. Pemberton was quite specific in her will. Everything goes to your wife, the house, the investments, the liquid assets. We're looking at approximately $1.9 million. Vince nearly dropped the phone. I'm sorry, what? Your wife hasn't told you? We've been trying to reach her for over a week. The inheritance is substantial, and there are some time-sensitive decisions to be made regarding the property. After hanging up, Vince sat in his home office, a converted bedroom filled with maps, security manuals, and photos from his military days. Nearly $2 million. Enough to ensure Ruby's care for life, to get the best equipment, the best treatments. Why hadn't Claudia mentioned any of this? He found the answer that evening when he returned from picking up Ruby from school. Claudia was in their bedroom, packing a suitcase. Going somewhere, he asked from the doorway. She startled, dropping a stack of expensive lingerie he'd never seen before. Oh, you're early. I was just organizing some things. The attorney called about your grandmother. The color drained from her face. What attorney? Harold Fitzpatrick. Interesting conversation about $1.9 million you forgot to mention. Vince stepped into the room, his voice deadly calm. Were you planning to tell me about the inheritance before or after you disappeared? Claudia's hand shook as she closed the suitcase. I don't know what you're talking about. The expensive luggage, the new clothes, the secret phone calls you think I haven't noticed. Vince had been tracking her movements for weeks now, using skills that had kept him alive in hostile territory. How long have you been planning this, Claudia? Planning what? But her voice cracked, and they both knew the lie was useless. Leaving, taking the money, and running. What about Ruby? Something shifted in Claudia's expression, a hardness that made her beautiful features look foreign. Ruby will be fine. She has you. And she has her needs. Special needs. I'm not cut out for this life, Vince. I never was. She's your daughter. She's a responsibility I never wanted. The words came out like venom. I wanted a normal life, a normal family. I wanted to travel, to paint in Florence, to have dinner parties without worrying about wheelchair accessibility. You wanted to play house until it got difficult. Claudia's chin lifted defiantly. Trevor understands. He knows what it's like to want more than this suburban prison. There it was. The confirmation Vince had been dreading and expecting in equal measure. How long? Does it matter? How long had you been fucking him? She flinched at his tone, the same voice he'd used on interrogations in Fallujah. Since right after the accident. He was there. He listened. He didn't treat me like I was broken just because my daughter was. Vince felt something cold and calculating settle in his chest. The same feeling he'd had when identifying threats in a crowd, when separating enemy combatants from civilians. Claudia had just moved herself into the enemy column. And the money is mine. Grandmother left it to me, not us. I'm taking what's mine and starting over. With Trevor. Her voice gained strength. We've been planning this for weeks. We're leaving for California tomorrow, then maybe Europe. Somewhere warm, somewhere beautiful, somewhere I can paint again and remember who I was before all this. Vince nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. And Ruby, you're her father. You'll take care of her. You're good at taking care of broken things. The insult hung between them like a blade. Vince had taken shrapnel in his left leg during his third deployment. It still ached before storms. He'd never once complained about it, never once let it slow him down. But Claudia had just revealed exactly how she saw their daughter. Broken, damaged, disposable. I won't fight the divorce, Vince said quietly. Take half the money if you want. Take the house equity. But you leave Ruby out of it. Claudia's relief was visible. Thank you. I know this is hard, but it's better this way. For everyone. Where are you meeting him? What? Trevor. Where are you meeting him? I assume you're not traveling together from here. Claudia hesitated, then seemed to decide honesty was safer than lies. He's flying out from Denver tomorrow. We're meeting in San Francisco. Smart. Less suspicious that way. Vince stepped aside, gesturing toward the door. You should pack the rest of your things. I'll keep Ruby busy downstairs. Claudia stared at him, clearly surprised by his calm reaction. You're okay with this? I want you happy, Claudia. I always have. The words tasted like ashes, but they serve his purpose. Let her think he was beaten, compliant. Let her underestimate the man she'd lived with for 10 years, but never really known. That night, after Claudia had loaded her car with suitcases and boxes of her paintings, after she'd kissed Ruby's forehead and whispered a goodbye that sounded like a lie, Vince sat in his office and opened his laptop. He had work to do. Chapter 3, The Mountain Drive. October 31st dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of brilliant blue sky that made the Rocky Mountains look close enough to touch. Vince was in his kitchen, making Ruby's breakfast, when he heard Claudia's voice in the hallway, artificially bright and cheerful. Would you like to go for a drive today, sweetheart? Just the two of us. Vince froze, spatula halfway to the plate. According to the plan Claudia thought he didn't know about, she was supposed to be on a plane to San Francisco this afternoon. Trevor had already left. Vince had confirmed his flight departure the previous evening through contacts at the airport. Where would we go, Mommy? Ruby's voice carried the cautious hope of a child who'd learned not to expect too much. Somewhere beautiful, up in the mountains. We could have a picnic, take some pictures. Would you like that? Vince set down the spatula and moved closer to the doorway. Through the crack, he could see Claudia kneeling beside Ruby's wheelchair, her expression animated in a way it hadn't been for months. But there was something wrong with her smile. Too wide, too bright, like a mask stretched over something hollow. Can Daddy come too? Not today, baby. Daddy has to work. This is just for us girls. Ruby's face fell slightly, but she nodded. Okay, can I bring my art supplies? Maybe I can draw the mountains. Of course. Claudia's voice cracked slightly. Bring whatever you want. Vince retreated to the kitchen, his mind racing. Why would Claudia want to take Ruby anywhere? She'd made it clear that their daughter was a burden, an obstacle to her new life with Trevor. Unless the thought that formed made his blood run cold. Claudia stood to inherit everything if something happened to Ruby. The inheritance was legally hers, but Ruby would be entitled to support, to medical care that would eat into that $1.9 million. And if Ruby died in an accident, a tragic fall during a scenic mountain drive, perhaps Claudia would be free to start her new life without any financial or emotional encumbrances. Vince forced himself to think clinically, the way he'd analyzed threat patterns in combat zones. What were the facts? Claudia was supposed to be leaving for California today. She'd suddenly decided to take Ruby on an unexpected mountain trip. She specifically didn't want Vince along. She'd been planning to abandon Ruby anyway, so emotional attachment wasn't a factor. Nearly $2 million was at stake. The conclusion was unavoidable and horrifying. Claudia was planning to kill their daughter. Daddy, Ruby called from the hallway. Mommy's taking me to see the mountains. Can you help me pack my art box? Vince composed his face and walked out to help his daughter, his mind already shifting into operational mode. He had 2 hours, maybe 3, before whatever Claudia was planning would happen. He needed to follow them, but carefully. If he was wrong, he'd look like a paranoid ex-soldier stalking his estranged wife. If he was right, he was about to watch someone try to murder his child. Here, kiddo. He knelt beside Ruby's wheelchair and helped her organize her drawing supplies. Take the good colored pencils, The ones Grandpa gave you. Will you look at my drawings when I get back? Absolutely. He kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. I love you, Ruby. I love you too, Daddy. Claudia appeared with Ruby's jacket and a small backpack. Ready for our adventure? As they left, Vince noted that Claudia had changed clothes. She was now wearing hiking boots, dark jeans, and a heavy jacket. Practical clothes for mountain terrain. The kind of outfit you'd wear if you needed to hike back down a trail after pushing a wheelchair off a cliff. Vince waited exactly 4 minutes after their car disappeared, then grabbed his keys and tactical gear. His Jeep was equipped with GPS tracking, night vision equipment, and a long-range camera with telephoto lens. Tools of his trade that were about to become instruments of salvation or evidence in a murder case. The tracking device he'd placed on Claudia's car the previous week showed her heading west on I-70 toward the mountain passes. She was driving toward Loveland Pass, a winding, dangerous road with steep drop-offs and minimal guardrails. The perfect place for an accident. Vince followed at a distance, using his spotting scope to keep their car in sight while staying back far enough to avoid detection. His hands were steady on the wheel, but his heart hammered against his ribs. Every minute that passed brought Ruby closer to danger. The road climbed steadily, past Georgetown and Silver Plume, into the high country where aspen trees had already shed their golden leaves for winter. Claudia's car finally stopped at a scenic overlook about 2 miles before the pass summit. A pullout with a spectacular view of the valley below and no other cars in sight. Vince parked behind a cluster of pine trees half a mile away and pulled out his camera. Through the telephoto lens, he watched Claudia help Ruby out of the car and into her wheelchair. They appear to be having a normal conversation, Ruby pointing excitedly at the mountains while Claudia smiled and nodded. Then Claudia began pushing the wheelchair toward the edge of the overlook. Vince's blood turned to ice as he realized what he was witnessing. The overlook had a waist-high stone barrier, but beyond that was a sheer drop of several hundred feet. All Claudia had to do was lift the front wheels of Ruby's chair over the barrier and push. It would look like a tragic accident, a mother and daughter enjoying the view when the wheelchair somehow went over the edge. Through his camera lens, Vince watched his wife position Ruby's chair just feet from the barrier. She was talking animatedly, gesturing toward the valley, keeping Ruby distracted. Ruby was laughing, completely unaware that her mother was positioning her for murder. Claudia glanced around the empty overlook, confirming they were alone. Then she moved behind Ruby's wheelchair and placed her hands on the push handles. Vince was already running. He'd left his Jeep silently, using every stealth technique the Army had taught him to move through the trees. The overlook was 200 yards away, across rocky terrain and scattered pines. He had maybe 30 seconds before Claudia made her move. Through the camera bouncing on his chest, he could still see them. Claudia had begun pushing Ruby closer to the barrier. Ruby was leaning forward excitedly, pointing at something in the valley below. Look, Mommy, is that a lake down there? Yes, sweetheart, a beautiful blue lake. Claudia's voice carried clearly in the thin mountain air. She lifted the front wheels of Ruby's chair onto the stone barrier. Ruby giggled at the sensation of tilting forward. It's like a seesaw. That's right, baby. Just like a seesaw. Vince was 50 yards away, moving as fast as he could over the uneven ground. Claudia raised the wheelchair higher, Ruby's weight now balanced precariously on the barrier. One push and she'd go over. Mommy, I'm scared. This is too high. Don't be scared, sweetheart. Mommy's got you. Claudia's hands shifted to push the wheelchair forward over the edge. Stop. Vince's roar echoed off the mountains as he burst from the tree lean, his service pistol drawn and aimed directly at his wife's head. Claudia spun around, her face a mask of shock and guilt. Ruby's wheelchair teetered on the edge of the barrier, balanced between safety and death. Daddy! Ruby's voice was high and frightened. What's happening? Very carefully, Vince said, his voice deadly calm despite the adrenaline flooding his system. Pull her back from the edge. Vince, this isn't, Claudia stammered. I said carefully. One wrong move, and I'll put a bullet in your skull. Claudia's hands shook as she pulled Ruby's wheelchair back on a solid ground. Ruby immediately tried to turn around, but Vince kept his focus on his wife. Daddy, why do you have your gun? It's okay, kiddo. Daddy's just being careful. He never took his eyes off Claudia. You were going to kill her. No, I would never. I've been watching for 10 minutes. I saw you position her chair. Saw you lift her onto the barrier. You were going to push our daughter off a cliff. Claudia's composure cracked completely. She's already dead, Vince. Don't you understand? The little girl we raised is gone. This thing in the wheelchair, it's not Ruby anymore. It's just a burden, a constant reminder of everything that went wrong. I can't live with it. Ruby made a small, wounded sound. Vince saw his daughter's face crumple as she finally understood what was happening. Mommy wanted to hurt me? The words broke something fundamental in Vince's chest. But his voice remained steady, his aim unwavering. Get away from her, Claudia. Vince, please. We can work this out. The money, we can split it. You can take care of Ruby, and I'll disappear. You'll never see me again. You're right about that last part. Something in his tone made Claudia step back, her eyes widening with a new kind of fear. Vince? What are you? You just tried to murder my daughter. Did you think I was going to call the police? Let you plead bargain down to manslaughter? Let you get out in 15 years and try again? Daddy. Ruby's voice was small and scared. Close your eyes, kiddo, and cover your ears. Can you do that for me? Ruby nodded and pressed her hands over her ears, squeezing her eyes shut. Vince looked at his wife, the woman he'd loved, the mother of his child, the person who just tried to commit the most unforgivable act imaginable. Vincent Morrison doesn't forgive, he said quietly, and he doesn't forget. Chapter 4, The Calculation. The silence after Claudia's death stretched across the mountain overlooked like fresh snow, clean, complete, and irreversible. Vince lowered his pistol and knelt beside Ruby's wheelchair, gently pulling her hands away from her ears. It's okay now, sweetheart. You can open your eyes. Ruby blinked up at him, her face streaked with tears. Where's Mommy? Vince glanced toward the edge of the overlook where Claudia's body had disappeared into the valley below. Mommy went away, kiddo. She's not coming back. Because she wanted to hurt me? The question cut deeper than any shrapnel he'd taken in Afghanistan. Ruby's 8-year-old mind was trying to process something no child should ever have to understand, that her own mother had tried to kill her. Yes, Vince said simply. He'd learned long ago that lies, even kind ones, only made truth harder to bear later. But I stopped her, and I'm never going to let anyone hurt you again. Ruby nodded solemnly, then reached up and hugged his neck. I love you, Daddy. I love you too, baby girl, more than anything in the world. As he held his daughter, Vince's mind was already working through the logistics. Claudia's body would eventually be found, but probably not for days. Mountain rescue teams would assume she'd fallen while hiking alone. Her car would be discovered at the overlook, and a logical conclusion would be a tragic accident. The inheritance would still be tied up in probate, but Ruby was Claudia's next of kin. Eventually, the money would come to her, managed by Vince as her guardian. Enough to ensure she had the best care, the best equipment, the best life possible despite her disability. Daddy, can we go home now? In a few minutes, kiddo. First, we need to be very careful about what we tell people. Ruby looked at him with the serious expression she'd inherited from him. About Mommy trying to hurt me? Some people might not understand why Daddy had to stop her. They might think Daddy did something wrong, even though he was protecting you. So we're going to say that Mommy brought you up here to see the mountains, and then she decided to go for a walk by herself. We stayed by the car because it was too rocky for your wheelchair. When she didn't come back, we got worried and went home. That's not what really happened. No, it's not. But sometimes we have to be smart about what we tell people, especially when the truth might cause problems for the people we love. Ruby considered this with the gravity of a child who'd learned that the world was more complicated and dangerous than she'd known. Okay, Daddy, I understand. They drove home in comfortable silence, Ruby dozing against her car seat while Vince planned the next phase. By the time they reached their suburban neighborhood, he had the entire scenario mapped out. First, he called the police to report Claudia missing. His story was simple and believable. His estranged wife had taken their disabled daughter for a drive to the mountains. When they returned, Claudia had been agitated and wanted to go for a hike alone. She'd never come back to the car. Vince had waited until evening before driving Ruby home and calling for help. "We were having marital problems," he told Detective Lisa Ramirez when she arrived at his house. Claudia was struggling with Ruby's disability. She'd been talking about leaving, starting over somewhere else. Was she depressed, Mr. Morrison? Suicidal? Vince allowed himself to look pained. "I don't know. Maybe. She'd been seeing a therapist, but she wouldn't talk to me about it. And there was someone else? Another man." The detective's pen scratched across her notepad. "Do you have a name?" "Trevor Hannigan. He was Ruby's physical therapist. I think they were planning to leave together." "Where's Mr. Hannigan now?" "California, I believe. He flew out yesterday." Detective Ramirez looked up sharply. "Before your wife disappeared?" "Yes, I think. Maybe he changed his mind about taking her with him. Maybe that's why she was so upset." It was a masterful touch. Give the police a narrative that explained Claudia's emotional state and provided a plausible motive for either suicide or reckless behavior. When they investigated, they'd find that Trevor had indeed flown to San Francisco the previous day, using airline tickets purchased with Claudia's inheritance money. The search and rescue operation began the next morning. Vince volunteered to help, playing the role of the worried husband while secretly ensuring they searched in the right areas. On the third day, Claudia's body was found at the bottom of a ravine, her skull fractured from the fall. "I'm sorry for your loss," Detective Ramirez told him when she brought the news. "The medical examiner is ruling it an accidental death. It appears she slipped and fell while hiking alone." Vince nodded gravely. "She always was impulsive. I should have gone with her. Mr. Morrison, there is one thing. We spoke with Mr. Hannigan in California. He admits to having an affair with your wife, but he claims they had no plans to leave together. In fact, he says your wife called him repeatedly the day she died, but he refused to answer." "I see. He seemed genuinely shocked by her death. And he has alibis for the entire time period. Flight records, hotel receipts, witnesses. So he abandoned her." Vince allowed anger to creep into his voice. She was planning to throw away her family for him, and he didn't even want her. "That seems to be the case. I'm sorry." After the detective left, Vince sat in his living room with Ruby, who was working on a drawing of the mountains. The picture showed two figures by a car, herself and her father. There was no sign of Claudia in the composition. "Are you okay, kiddo?" Ruby looked up from her drawing. "I think so. Daddy, yeah. Are you sad that Mommy died?" The question caught him off guard. He studied his daughter's face, looking for any sign of the trauma she'd endured. But Ruby seemed remarkably resilient, perhaps because she'd already been processing her mother's emotional abandonment for months. "I'm sad that she was sick," he said finally. "I'm sad that she couldn't love us the way we deserved. But I'm not sad that she can't hurt us anymore." Ruby nodded and returned to her drawing. "I'm not sad either. Is that wrong?" "No, sweetheart. It's not wrong to feel safe." That evening, after Ruby was asleep, Vince made a phone call to California. "Trevor Hannigan. This is Vincent Morrison." There was a long pause. "Jesus. I heard about Claudia. I'm so sorry for your loss." "Are you?" "Of course I am. Look, I know what you must think of me, but I think you're a predator who targeted a vulnerable woman and convinced her to abandon her disabled child for money. That's not what happened, isn't it? You seduced my wife, made her promises you had no intention of keeping, and then cut her loose when she actually tried to follow through." Trevor's voice became defensive. Claudia was unstable. The thing she was talking about doing, leaving Ruby, disappearing with the inheritance money, I realized I couldn't be part of that. "So you took her money for plane tickets and hotel reservations, then decided to develop a conscience?" "I never took her money. I paid for my own trip." Vince smiled coldly at the lie. His financial investigation had been thorough. "The credit card receipts say otherwise, Trevor. The ones I'm looking at right now. I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you don't. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to disappear. Change your name, move somewhere far away, and never contact anyone from your old life again. Because if I ever see you, if I ever hear that you're working with vulnerable families again, if you ever come anywhere near my daughter, I will kill you. Do you understand? You can't threaten me. I'll call the police." "And tell them what?" That the husband of your dead lover is upset about your affair? That he knows you stole money from her? I'm sure they'll be very sympathetic. The line went quiet except for Trevor's labored breathing. I was a sniper in Afghanistan, Trevor. 3 confirmed kills at over 800 meters. You wouldn't even see me coming. You're insane. I'm practical. My wife is dead because she chose you over her family. I consider you partially responsible for that. Now you get to live with the consequences. Vince hung up and deleted Trevor's number from his phone. Within 6 months, the man had indeed disappeared, quit his job, left no forwarding address, and vanished from social media. Message received and understood. The inheritance took 8 months to clear probate. When it did, Vince established a trust fund for Ruby's care and education, invested the remainder conservatively, and bought a new house with complete accessibility features. They moved to Colorado Springs, closer to better medical facilities and farther from memories of Claudia. Ruby adapted to their new life with remarkable resilience. She excelled in her adaptive sports programs, made friends at her new school, and continued to create art that captured the beauty she saw in the world around her. She rarely mentioned her mother, and when she did, it was without sadness or longing. "Do you miss having a mommy?" she asked one evening as Vince helped her with her homework. "I miss having the mommy I thought you deserved," he said honestly. "But I don't miss the person she actually was." "Me neither." Ruby returned to her math problems. "We're better just us, aren't we?" "Yes, kiddo, we are." Vince had learned something important on that mountain overlook. There were lines that, once crossed, could never be uncrossed. Claudia had chosen to see their daughter as expendable, and that choice had made her expendable in return. Vincent Morrison protected what mattered to him, and he eliminated threats with surgical precision. He slept well at night, knowing that philosophy would never change. Chapter 5: The Reckoning. 2 years after Claudia's death, Vince thought his past was buried as permanently as his wife's body. Then Trevor Hannigan made the mistake of returning to Denver. The first sign was a voicemail on Ruby's cell phone, a birthday present for her 10th birthday that came with strict monitoring protocols. "Hi, Ruby. This is Trevor. I used to be your physical therapist, remember? I was wondering if I could see you sometime. Maybe we could get ice cream and talk about your mom." Vince played the message 3 times, his expression growing colder with each repetition. Ruby had been in the kitchen when the call came, working on her homework at the specially modified table he'd built for her wheelchair. "Daddy, you look angry. Someone called who shouldn't have." He knelt beside her chair, his voice carefully controlled. "Ruby, do you remember Trevor? The man who used to help with your exercises? The one who made Mommy laugh?" Ruby's expression was neutral. She'd learned to read his moods and knew something was wrong. "Yes, he called you just now. If he ever tries to contact you again, calls, texts, shows up at school, you tell me immediately. Don't talk to him, don't go anywhere with him. Understand?" Ruby nodded solemnly. "Is he dangerous?" "Potentially. He's part of why Mommy got sick." That afternoon, while Ruby was at her adaptive swimming lesson, Vince made some calls. Within 2 hours, he had Trevor's current address, employment information, and daily routine. The man was working at a physical therapy clinic in Lakewood under his real name, apparently confident that enough time had passed to make him safe. He was wrong. Vince conducted surveillance for 3 days, learning Trevor's patterns. The man lived alone in a garden apartment complex, drove a used Honda Civic, and seemed to be struggling financially. He worked late most evenings and stopped at the same sports bar twice a week. A creature of habit, which made him predictable and vulnerable. On Thursday evening, Vince followed Trevor to O'Malley's bar and took a seat 2 stools down. Trevor was watching a basketball game and nursing a beer, apparently unaware he was being observed. "Trevor Hannigan," Vince said quietly. Trevor turned, and his face went white when he recognized his observer. "Morrison, what are you doing here?" "You called my daughter. I just wanted to see how she was doing. Claudia always talked about." "Don't." Vince's voice cut through the bar noise like a blade. "Don't say her name. Don't pretend you cared about either of them." Trevor glanced around nervously. The bar was crowded, which probably made him feel safer. "Look, I know you blame me for what happened, but I love Claudia. I never wanted her to get hurt. You abandoned her when she needed you most. She was talking about doing things that would have ruined both our lives. I tried to reason with her, but she wouldn't listen. Vince studied Trevor's face, reading the micro-expressions that revealed truth from lies. The man was telling himself a convenient story, that he'd been the rational one, that Claudia's death was tragic, but not his fault. What things? She wanted to take Ruby somewhere and make it look like an accident. She said it would solve all our problems, that we could have the inheritance money and start fresh somewhere else. Trevor's voice dropped to a whisper. I told her I couldn't be part of something like that. That's when I left for California. But you kept the money she'd given you. What money? Vince pulled out his phone and showed Trevor a photo of credit card statements. The $3,000 she transferred to your account. The money that paid for your California trip. Trevor's hands shook as he recognized the documents. How did you get those? I'm very good at finding information. Banking records, employment history, medical files. It's all available if you know where to look. Those are private records. You can't just. I can do whatever I want, Trevor. I have resources you can't imagine and moral flexibility you wouldn't understand. Vince leaned closer. What I can't do is allow you to contact my daughter. I'm not trying to hurt her. I just thought maybe she would know more about her mother, about how much Claudia loved her. Claudia tried to push Ruby off a cliff. The words hit Trevor like a physical blow. His beer glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor, drawing stares from other patrons. That's not. She wouldn't have actually done it. She was just upset, talking crazy. I was there, Trevor. I watched her position Ruby's wheelchair on the edge of a 300-foot drop. I watched her lift the front wheels over the barrier. I watched her prepare to push my daughter to her death. Trevor's face had gone gray. You're lying. Am I? Think about it. Claudia disappears on a mountain drive with Ruby. Her body is found at the bottom of a ravine. Ruby comes home traumatized and won't talk about what happened. What conclusion would you draw? Oh God. Trevor buried his face in his hands. She really was going to do it, and you enabled her. You convinced her that Ruby was a burden, that she deserved a different life, that the inheritance money was more important than her daughter's life. I never said those things. You didn't have to. Your actions said them for you. You seduced a vulnerable woman, isolated her from her family, and then abandoned her when her desperation turned dangerous. Vince stood and dropped a 20 on the bar. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to disappear again, this time permanently. If you contact my daughter, if you come near our home, if you even search for us online, I will consider it a direct threat to Ruby's safety. And then what? Vince looked down at Trevor with the same cold assessment he'd once used on enemy combatants. Then I'll kill you. Not in anger, not for revenge. As a practical matter of threat elimination. Trevor's voice cracked. You can't just threaten to murder people. I'm not threatening, Trevor. I'm explaining consequences. Claudia crossed the line when she tried to hurt Ruby. You crossed the line when you helped create the situation that led to that moment. In my world, some lines can't be uncrossed. Vince walked away, leaving Trevor shaking at the bar. But he didn't go far. He waited in his Jeep across the street, watching through night vision scopes as Trevor stumbled out of the bar 20 minutes later. Trevor made it halfway to his car before Vince struck. The attack was surgical and silent. A blood choke applied from behind that rendered Trevor unconscious in seconds. Vince dragged the limp body into the shadows between two buildings, then waited for him to regain consciousness. Wake up, Trevor. Trevor's eyes fluttered open, then widened in terror as he realized his situation. He was zip-tied to a metal fence, unable to move or call for help. What are you doing? Teaching you about consequences. Vince knelt beside him, his voice conversational. You called my daughter because you thought enough time had passed to make you safe. You thought I'd moved on, forgotten about you, accepted that what happened was just an unfortunate coincidence. Please, I didn't mean any harm. But you did mean harm, Trevor. Maybe not physical harm, but psychological harm. Ruby has spent 2 years healing from her mother's betrayal. She's learned to trust again, to feel safe again. And you want to tear open those wounds because you were feeling guilty about your part in Claudia's death. Vince pulled out a knife, a combat blade he'd carried in Afghanistan. Trevor's breathing became rapid and shallow. Here's the thing about guilt, Trevor. It's your problem, not ours. Ruby doesn't need to know about your relationship with her mother, doesn't need to hear your justifications or apologies. She needs to be left alone to build a healthy life. I understand. I'll leave her alone, I promise. You promised that once before. Then you came back. Vince pressed the knife point against Trevor's throat, just hard enough to draw a thin line of blood. People like you don't learn from warnings, Trevor. You learn from pain. What happened next took exactly 17 minutes. When it was over, Trevor was alive, but permanently marked. He would never forget the lesson, and the physical reminders would ensure he never forgot who had taught it to him. You have 24 hours to leave Colorado, Vince said as he cut the zip ties. If I see you again, if you contact anyone from your old life, if you even think about my daughter, this will feel like a gentle warning in comparison. Trevor crawled away into the darkness, leaving a trail of blood and broken promises. The next morning, Ruby was eating breakfast when her phone buzzed with a text message. She looked at it, frowned, and handed the phone to her father. "It's from Trevor, Daddy." The message was brief. "I'm sorry. I won't bother you again. Be safe and happy." Vince deleted the message and handed the phone back. "He won't be calling anymore, kiddo." "Good." Ruby returned to her cereal. "I didn't want to talk to him anyway. He smelled funny, like fear and lies." Ruby looked up at him with those knowing eyes that sometimes seem too old for a 10-year-old face. "Some people carry their bad choices with them, don't they, Daddy?" "Yes, they do. But not us." "No, sweetheart, not us." Vincent Morrison had eliminated another threat to his daughter's peace. And just like with Claudia, he slept well that night, knowing his family was safe. Chapter 6, The Network. Ruby was 13 when Vince discovered that Claudia's family knew the truth about what had happened on the mountain. The revelation came through an unexpected source. Eleanor Pemberton's estate attorney, Harold Fitzpatrick, who called with news about a will contest. "Mr. Morrison, I'm afraid there's been a development regarding your late wife's inheritance. Her cousin, Patricia Pemberton Wells, is challenging the will on the grounds that Claudia was murdered." Vince set down his coffee carefully. "Murdered? That's absurd. The death was ruled accidental. Ms. Pemberton Wells has hired a private investigator. She's claiming that new evidence suggests foul play." "What kind of evidence?" "I'm not privy to the details, but she's filed a motion to have the case reopened. If successful, it could freeze Ruby's trust fund pending investigation." After the call, Vince sat in his office analyzing this new threat. Patricia Pemberton Wells was Eleanor's great-niece, a woman in her 50s who lived in Boston and had always resented being excluded from the inheritance. If she could prove Claudia was murdered, she might be able to claim the money never legally passed to Ruby. More concerning was the private investigator. Someone was asking questions, digging into the circumstances of Claudia's death, possibly uncovering inconsistencies in the official story. Vince made a series of calls to contacts in law enforcement and private security. Within 6 hours, he had a complete file on Patricia Pemberton Wells and her investigator, a former Boston PD detective named Marcus Thorne. The picture that emerged was troubling. Thorne was competent and thorough, with a reputation for solving cold cases. He'd been investigating Claudia's death for 8 months and had apparently uncovered several anomalies. The lack of cell phone records showing Claudia's final movements. The suspicious timing of her death relative to Trevor's departure. Witness reports of a second vehicle at the mountain overlook. Inconsistencies in Ruby's initial statements to police. Worse, Thorne had tracked down Trevor Hannigan in his new life in Oregon and interviewed him extensively. If Trevor had revealed what he knew about Claudia's intentions regarding Ruby, it could provide a motive for murder. That evening, while Ruby was at her weekly art class, Vince drove to downtown Denver to meet with his lawyer, Benjamin Cross. Cross was a former military attorney who specialized in discrete legal problems for clients with complex backgrounds. "How serious is this?" will challenge. Vince asked. Cross reviewed the documents with his usual methodical precision. "Potentially very serious. If they can establish that Claudia was murdered, the inheritance would be frozen pending criminal investigation. Even if charges are never filed, the civil case could drag on for years. And if they prove murder, Depends on who they think did it. If you're implicated, Ruby's guardianship could be challenged. The trust fund could be seized as proceeds of crime. Worst case scenario, you could lose custody of your daughter. The threat was clear. Patricia Pemberton Wells wasn't just trying to steal Ruby's inheritance. She was threatening to destroy their entire life. What are my options? Legally, hope they can't meet the burden of proof. The original investigation was thorough, and without direct evidence of foul play, it's mostly circumstantial speculation. And illegally? Cross looked at him steadily. I didn't hear that question, and you didn't ask it. Vince drove home with a tactical assessment forming in his mind. Patricia Pemberton Wells was the primary threat. Eliminate her, and the will challenge would die with her. But Marcus Thorne was the more immediate danger. His investigation was what gave the challenge credibility. The smart play was to neutralize Thorne first, then deal with Patricia. Research on Marcus Thorne revealed a man with a clean record and few vulnerabilities. Divorced, no children, lived alone in a South End apartment, drove a 10-year-old sedan. His only notable weakness was a gambling problem that had contributed to his divorce and forced early retirement from the police force. Vince spent a week learning Thorne's patterns. The man was disciplined and careful, exactly the kind of investigator who might eventually piece together what really happened on the mountain. He had to be stopped. The approach Vince chose was subtle and psychological. Rather than direct confrontation, he began feeding Thorne false information through carefully constructed sources. Bank records that suggested Trevor Hannigan had been deeper in debt than previously known. Witness statements from California that placed Trevor at the scene of a suspicious accident involving a former girlfriend. The goal was to redirect Thorne's investigation toward Trevor as the primary suspect, a man who had motive, means, and opportunity to kill Claudia for the inheritance money. It worked better than Vince had hoped. Within 3 weeks, Thorne was convinced he'd identified the real killer. He flew to Oregon to arrest Trevor, only to discover that his target had committed suicide 2 days earlier, an apparent result of guilt and pressure from the investigation. Trevor's death wasn't actually suicide, of course. Vince had traveled to Oregon under a false identity and staged the scene after eliminating his former adversary. But to Thorne and the authorities, it looked like a confession of guilt. With her primary witness dead and her investigator convinced that the real killer had been found, Patricia Pemberton Wells dropped her will challenge. The inheritance remained secure, and Ruby's future was protected. Is everything okay, Daddy? Ruby asked one evening as they worked on her college application essays. At 17, she was academically gifted and had been accepted to several prestigious universities with full accessibility accommodations. Everything's fine, kiddo. Why do you ask? You've been tense lately. More than usual. Ruby had grown into a perceptive young woman with her father's analytical mind and her own artistic sensibilities. She created digital art now, using specialized software and adaptive controllers that allowed her to paint with precision despite her physical limitations. Just some legal issues with your mom's family. Nothing you need to worry about. Are they trying to take my money? Vince looked at his daughter with pride. She'd always been direct, never one to shy away from difficult truths. They were. But it's handled now. Ruby nodded and returned to her essay. Good. I have plans for that money. Oh, I want to start a foundation for kids with disabilities whose families can't afford proper care. She looked up at him with steady eyes. Kids like I would have been if you hadn't protected me. Vincent Morrison felt something warm and fierce expand in his chest. His daughter had survived attempted murder, the loss of her mother, and years of adaptive challenges. Instead of becoming bitter or broken, she'd grown into someone who wanted to help others facing similar struggles. That's a worthy goal, Ruby. I learned from watching you, Daddy. Sometimes good people have to do hard things to protect what matters. She said it casually, as if commenting on the weather. But Vince heard the deeper understanding in her words. Ruby knew more about what he'd done than she'd ever directly acknowledged. And she approved. Yes, he said quietly. Sometimes they do. That night, Vince stood in his office looking at photos of their life together. Ruby's graduation from high school, her acceptance letter to Stanford, her latest art exhibition at a local gallery. Every milestone had been threatened by someone who wanted to use or harm her. Every threat had been eliminated. Vincent Morrison had built his daughter a fortress of safety with the bodies of her enemies, and he would continue building it for as long as she needed protection. Chapter 7. The Legacy. Ruby was 25 and had just been named one of Forbes 30 Under 30 for her disability advocacy work when the final threat to their peace emerged from an unexpected direction. Vince was in his garage, maintaining the weapons he hoped never to use again, when Ruby wheeled in with a concerned expression. "Daddy, we need to talk." He set down the disassembled pistol and gave her his full attention. "What's wrong?" "I got a call today from someone claiming to be my half-sister." The words hit Vince like a physical blow. "What?" "Her name is Jessica Hartley. She says her mother had an affair with Mom 15 years ago, and that mom was bisexual. She wants to meet me." Vince's mind raced through the implications. An unknown relative could complicate Ruby's inheritance, challenge her legal status, or worse, possess information about Claudia that could reignite questions about her death. Did she say what she wanted? Money, I think. She was very careful not to ask directly, but she mentioned that she'd had a difficult life and deserved to know her sister. She also said she had some of Mom's personal belongings, letters and photos I've never seen. Where is she now? Denver. She wants to meet for coffee tomorrow. Vince studied his daughter's face. Ruby was brilliant and successful, but she'd always yearned for family connections beyond their tight duo. The idea of a sister, even a half-sister from a secret relationship, would be powerfully appealing. "What do you think?" he asked. "I want to meet her, but I also want you to check her out first." Ruby's expression was serious. "You taught me to be careful about people who show up wanting things." That evening, Vince conducted a thorough background investigation on Jessica Hartley. What he found was disturbing. Jessica was the 28-year-old daughter of Linda Hartley, a woman who had indeed worked at the same art gallery as Claudia 15 years earlier. But Linda had a history of mental illness, drug addiction, and financial instability. Jessica had inherited many of the same problems, along with a criminal record for theft and fraud. More concerning were the personal belongings Jessica claimed to possess. Vince's investigation revealed that she'd recently purchased a box of items from an estate sale, items that had supposedly belonged to someone named Claudia Morrison. Jessica was running a con, targeting Ruby because of her wealth and public profile. The half-sister story was fabricated, designed to exploit Ruby's desire for family connection. "She's lying," Vince told Ruby the next morning. "There's no biological relationship. She's a con artist who's done this before with other wealthy young people." Ruby's face fell with disappointment. "Are you sure?" "Positive. I have the estate sale receipts showing where she bought the personal belongings she claims to have inherited. So there's no sister." "No, kiddo. I'm sorry." Ruby nodded, processing the deception. "What are you going to do about her?" The question hung in the air between them. At 25, Ruby was old enough to understand the full scope of what her father was capable of. She'd never asked direct questions about the people who had threatened them over the years, but she'd noticed when those threats disappeared. "What do you want me to do?" Vince asked. Ruby considered this carefully. "I want her to leave us alone, but I also want her to stop targeting other people like this." "How many families has she hurt with these lies?" Vince felt a surge of pride. His daughter wasn't just thinking about protecting herself. She was thinking about protecting future victims. "I'll handle it." That afternoon, Vince met Jessica Hartley at the coffee shop where she'd planned to ambush Ruby. She was an attractive woman with Claudia's coloring and body type, probably part of why she'd chosen this particular con. "Mr. Morrison, I wasn't expecting to see you. I was supposed to meet Ruby. Ruby sent me instead. She's curious about your story." Jessica's face lit up with what appeared to be genuine excitement. "I can't wait to tell her everything about our mother. I have so many pictures and letters." "Show me." Jessica opened a manila folder and spread its contents across the small table. Vince recognized some of the items. Photos of Claudia that had apparently been purchased from online auction sites. Letters and handwriting that didn't match his dead wife's style. "Interesting collection," he said. "Where did you get these?" "Mom saved everything. She always hoped that someday Claudia would come back to us. Linda Hartley never knew my wife." Jessica's expression flickered. What do you mean? I mean, you bought these items from an estate sale in Pueblo 3 weeks ago. I have the receipt. Vince placed a copy of the sales document on the table. Jessica stared at it, her con falling apart in real time. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you don't. Just like you don't know about the Thompson family in Phoenix, or the Rodriguezes in San Antonio, or the other wealthy families you've targeted with similar schemes. Jessica's hand moved toward her purse, but Vince caught her wrist before she could reach whatever was inside. Let's skip the part where you try to record this conversation for potential blackmail, he said quietly. We both know why you're here. I was just trying to connect with family. You were trying to extort money from my daughter by exploiting her desire for family connection. It's a cruel scheme, Jessica, and it ends today. Jessica tried to pull away, but Vince's grip was unyielding. Around them, the coffee shop buzzed with normal activity. Students studying, couples chatting, business people on laptops. No one paid attention to what looked like an ordinary conversation between a father and his daughter's friend. What do you want? Jessica whispered. I want you to disappear. Change your name, move to another state, find a legitimate way to make a living. Stop preying on people who are looking for connection. And if I don't? Vince's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes made Jessica's breath catch. Then I'll make you disappear. You can't threaten me. I'll call the police. And tell them what? That a man confronted you about your fraud scheme? That he has evidence of your previous cons? I'm sure they'll be very sympathetic. Jessica's face had gone pale. What kind of evidence? Vince released her wrist and pulled out his phone, scrolling through photos and documents. Bank records showing deposits that correspond to your various schemes. Hotel receipts placing you in cities where families were targeted. Social media posts where you forgot to maintain your cover story. He showed her image after image of her criminal activities, compiled through weeks of investigation. You're very good at what you do, Jessica, but you're not careful enough. I have enough evidence here to put you in prison for 10 years. What do you want? I told you. Disappear. Start over somewhere else, under a different name if necessary. Stop hurting people who are looking for family. Jessica looked at the evidence on his phone, then at his implacable expression. And if I do this, you'll destroy the evidence. I'll keep it. Insurance against you changing your mind and coming back. That's blackmail. That's justice. You prey on people's emotions, exploit their longing for connection, steal their money through lies. Now you get to experience what it feels like to have someone else controlling your fate. Jessica gathered up her fake documents with shaking hands. I need time to arrange things. You have 48 hours. After that, I assume you've chosen to let the police handle this instead. Vince watched her leave, then texted Ruby, problem solved. She won't be bothering us again. Ruby's response came immediately. Thank you, Daddy. I love you. 2 days later, Jessica Hartley checked out of her Denver hotel and drove toward the Montana border. She would spend the next several years working legitimate jobs under her real name, never again attempting to con grieving families. That evening, Ruby joined Vince on their back patio, where he was grilling dinner while she worked on her laptop. The foundation cleared another milestone today, she said. We're officially funding adaptive equipment for 50 families nationwide. That's wonderful, kiddo. I've been thinking about expanding internationally. There are kids in developing countries who don't have access to any resources for disability care. Vince flipped the stakes and studied his daughter's profile. At 25, Ruby had become exactly the person he'd hoped she would be. Strong, compassionate, determined to make the world better for others facing similar challenges. You know, she said casually, I've never asked you directly about what happened to all the people who try to hurt us over the years. Vince went still. Ruby, I don't need details, Daddy. I just want you to know that I understand. And I'm grateful. She looked up at him with eyes that held complete acceptance. You protected me when no one else would. You made sure I could grow up safe and become who I wanted to be. You did that yourself, kiddo. I just cleared the obstacles. Exactly. Ruby smiled. And now I can use my life to help other kids who don't have someone like you watching over them. Vincent Morrison looked at his daughter, brilliant, successful, and utterly secure in the knowledge that she was loved and protected, and felt the deep satisfaction of a mission completed. He had built her a fortress with the bodies of their enemies, and she had used that safety to become a force for good in the world. He reflected, the best possible outcome. Chapter 8. The Reckoning. Ruby was 31 when the past finally caught up with them in the form of a federal investigation. The knock came at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. Vince was in his kitchen making coffee when he saw the black SUVs surrounding his house. Through the window, he counted at least 8 agents, all wearing FBI raid jackets. "Ruby," he called calmly, "stay in your room and lock the door." "What's happening, Daddy?" "Official business. I'll handle it." Vince opened the front door before they could break it down. The lead agent was a woman in her 40s with steel gray hair and intelligent eyes. "Vincent Morrison? I'm Special Agent Sarah Chun, FBI. We have a warrant to search these premises." She handed him the paperwork, which he scanned quickly. The warrant was broad but focused. They were looking for evidence related to the deaths of Claudia Morrison, Trevor Hannigan, Patricia Pemberton Wells, and Marcus Thorne. "May I ask what prompted this investigation?" "New evidence has come to light suggesting a connection between these deaths. We'd like to ask you some questions. I want my lawyer present." "Of course." The search took 6 hours. The FBI team was professional and thorough, using advanced forensic equipment to examine everything from his computer files to trace evidence in his garage. They confiscated several items: hard drives, financial records, and some of his military gear. But Vince had expected this possibility and prepared accordingly. The real evidence was stored in locations they would never find. During the search, Vince called Benjamin Cross, who arrived within an hour and immediately demanded to speak with his client privately. "How serious is this?" Vince asked when they were alone in Cross's car. "Very serious. Someone gave them detailed information about all 4 deaths. They know things that were never made public." "Like what?" "The exact timing of Trevor's movements, the private investigator's notes about inconsistencies in Claudia's death, Patricia Pemberton Wells' private communications about the will challenge." Cross looked grim. "Someone with inside knowledge is talking." Vince considered the possibilities. Very few people knew the complete truth about what had happened over the years. Ruby knew some of it, but would never betray him. His contacts in law enforcement and private security were loyal and well compensated for their discretion. Who's the source? That's what we need to find out. But Vincent, if they have enough evidence to obtain this warrant, they probably have enough to charge you. You need to prepare for the possibility of arrest. That evening, after the FBI had finished their search and left with boxes of material, Vince sat with Ruby in their living room. She'd been remarkably calm throughout the ordeal, working on her laptop while federal agents dismantled their life. "They think you killed people to protect me," she said without preamble. "Yes. Did you?" The question hung between them. For 31 years, they'd danced around the truth, speaking in implications and euphemisms. But the federal investigation had stripped away any remaining pretense. "Yes," Vince said simply. Ruby nodded as if he'd confirmed something she'd always known. "How many? Does it matter? I want to understand the scope of what you did for me." Vince studied his daughter's face. She showed no shock, no horror, no moral outrage. Only a calm desire to understand the full extent of his protection. "Your mother, because she tried to kill you. Trevor, because he enabled her and then threatened to expose you to psychological harm. Patricia Pemberton Wells and Marcus Thorne, because they threatened your financial security and our life together. Jessica Hartley didn't die, but she received a clear message about the consequences of targeting you. Anyone else?" 3 others over the years. People who tried to exploit your disability for their own gain, or who posed credible threats to your safety. Ruby was quiet for a long moment, processing the magnitude of what he'd revealed. 8 people died because they threatened me. 8 people died because they made choices that put you at risk. I simply eliminated those risks. And you never felt guilty about it? Never. Not once. Vince met her eyes steadily. Every person I killed had made a deliberate choice to harm you or exploit you. They crossed lines that made them enemies of everything I care about. Ruby wheeled closer to him, reaching out to take his hand. "Thank you." The words caught him off guard. "Ruby, no, I mean it. Thank you for protecting me." Thank you for loving me enough to do terrible things so I could have a good life. Thank you for never making me feel like a burden, even when other people saw me that way. Vince felt his throat tighten with emotion. You were never a burden, kiddo. You were always worth protecting. I know. That's what made you different from Mom, from Trevor, from all the others. You saw me as valuable, not damaged. Ruby squeezed his hand. Now what do we do about the FBI? We prepare for war. Over the next week, Benjamin Cross worked to identify the source of the FBI's information. What he discovered was both surprising and troubling. It's Linda Hartley, he reported during a secure meeting. Jessica's mother. She's been feeding information to a retired FBI agent named William Cross, no relation, who's been building a case against you for 2 years. How does Linda Hartley know anything about the other deaths? Jessica apparently did more research on your family than we realized. She uncovered connections between the various deaths and became convinced you were a serial killer. When her con failed, she went to her mother with the information. And Linda took it to the FBI? To William Cross, specifically. He's been obsessed with unsolved cases involving military veterans. He sees you as his white whale. Vince absorbed this information with tactical precision. The threat was real and immediate. Linda Hartley had enough circumstantial evidence to support prosecution, and William Cross had the credibility to make federal agents listen. Options, legally, hope they can't meet the burden of proof. Most of what they have is circumstantial. Without direct evidence or witnesses, it's hard to prove murder. And practically, Cross looked at him steadily. The sources of their information could disappear. But that would be extremely risky at this point. They're probably under federal protection. Vince drove home that evening knowing that his time was running out. Linda Hartley and William Cross had to be eliminated, but doing so while under federal surveillance would be nearly impossible. He found Ruby in her art studio, working on a digital painting of mountains under a stormy sky. The image was beautiful and ominous. Peaks shrouded in dark clouds with lightning illuminating the landscape. I may have to go away for a while, he told her. Prison, possibly. Ruby saved her work and turned to face him. Then we need to accelerate our timeline. What timeline? The foundation is expanding internationally next month. I'll be traveling extensively, Asia, Europe, South America. Very difficult for federal agents to monitor closely. Vince understood immediately. You're planning to help me disappear. I'm planning to ensure my father can continue protecting people who need it. There are other families out there facing threats, other children who deserve the kind of safety you gave me. Ruby, if they catch you helping me, they won't catch me. I learned from the best. That night, father and daughter began planning what would be Vincent Morrison's final operation. Not an elimination of threats, but an escape that would allow him to continue his work from the shadows while keeping Ruby safe from prosecution. It would be the most complex and dangerous mission of his career. And for the first time, his daughter would be his partner instead of the person he was protecting. Chapter 9. The Inheritance. 6 months later, Vincent Morrison was officially declared dead in a mountaineering accident in the Swiss Alps. Ruby had been leading a foundation expedition to establish adaptive sports programs for disabled children in European mountain communities when her father's climbing rope allegedly failed during a routine ascent. The body was never recovered, which wasn't unusual in alpine accidents. Crevasses and avalanches swallowed climbers regularly in the high country. The Swiss authorities conducted a thorough investigation and concluded that experienced mountaineer Vincent Morrison had simply encountered bad luck on a technically challenging route. Ruby Morrison returned to the United States a widow's daughter, inheriting her father's assets and continuing his work through the foundation. She moved the organization's headquarters to Geneva, splitting her time between Europe and Colorado while expanding programs globally. What the authorities didn't know was that Vincent Morrison was very much alive. The climbing accident had been meticulously staged. Vincent spent months learning the mountain, identifying the precise location where a body could plausibly disappear forever. He dropped his climbing gear at the scene, activated an emergency beacon, and then disappeared into the European underground. Ruby had arranged the logistics through shell companies and false identities established years earlier as contingency planning. Her father now lived under the name Michael Stevens, operating a private security firm that specialized in protecting vulnerable individuals from predators and exploiters. Any regrets? Ruby asked during one of their rare encrypted video calls. She was in her Geneva office, while he was in a safe house somewhere in the Balkans. None. This way I can protect other families without the threat of prosecution. And you're safe from any federal investigation. I miss you. I miss you too, kiddo. But this isn't forever. Eventually, the heat will die down, and we'll find a way to be together again. Ruby nodded, though they both knew that might take years. I have some news. The Foundation identified 3 families this month that are facing situations similar to what we experienced. Oh, a disabled teenager in Romania whose stepfather is abusing her for insurance money. A family in Thailand whose son was paralyzed in an accident and is now being targeted by organ traffickers. A girl in Brazil whose parents are planning to abandon her at an institution so they can immigrate. Vince leaned forward, interested. And I thought Michael Stevens' security firm might be able to help with those situations. Pro bono work, of course. On the screen, Vince smiled with the cold satisfaction of a predator who'd just identified new prey. Michael Stevens would be very interested in those cases. Over the following months, the mysterious security consultant began appearing in crisis zones around the world. Abusive stepfathers died in accidents. Organ traffickers disappeared without trace. Parents who planned to abandon disabled children found themselves facing consequences that made them reconsider their priorities. The work was satisfying in ways that surprised Vince. Instead of simply protecting Ruby, he was now protecting vulnerable children across the globe. Each eliminated threat represented dozens of potential victims who would now be safe. Ruby coordinated the operations through her foundation work, identifying targets and providing logistical support. She'd inherited her father's tactical mind along with his moral flexibility, and she used both to expand their mission far beyond what he'd originally envisioned. We're making a real difference, she told him during another encrypted call. The families we've helped are thriving. The children are getting the support they need, and the predators who targeted them are no longer a threat to anyone. How many operations this year? 14 successful interventions. 0 survivors among the threats. Vince felt a surge of pride. His daughter had become not just a survivor, but an active participant in protecting others facing similar dangers. She'd taken his lessons about eliminating threats and applied them on a global scale. Any complications? None. The beauty of working internationally is that local authorities rarely connect deaths across different countries. A stepfather in Romania and an organ trafficker in Thailand aren't obviously related unless someone is specifically looking for patterns. And no one except us. 2 years after his supposed death, Vincent Morrison's legacy was more powerful than it had ever been during his lifetime. Through the foundation, Ruby now commanded resources that allowed her to identify and eliminate threats to vulnerable children worldwide. Through his new identity, Vince could operate without legal constraints or federal oversight. They'd become something unprecedented, a father-daughter team of protectors who used lethal force to defend those who couldn't defend themselves. Do you ever think about what we've become? Ruby asked during one of their conversations. What do you mean? We've killed dozens of people between us. We operate outside the law, judge people guilty of crimes they haven't been convicted of, and execute them without trial. Vince studied his daughter's face on the encrypted video feed. She didn't look troubled by these facts, merely curious about his perspective. Does that bother you? No. I was just wondering if it bothered you. Never. Every person we've eliminated made a choice to prey on the vulnerable. We just ensured they face consequences for those choices. Ruby smiled. Good, because I have 17 new cases I want to discuss with you. As she began outlining the latest threats they'd identified, predators targeting disabled children, families planning to abandon special needs relatives, traffickers exploiting the vulnerable, Vince felt the deep satisfaction of a mission that had evolved beyond his original vision. He'd started by protecting one disabled girl from her own mother. Now he and that girl were protecting hundreds of vulnerable children from threats across the globe. Vincent Morrison had never forgiven betrayal, and he'd never forgotten the people who tried to harm what he loved. But he'd also never imagined that his uncompromising approach to threat elimination would become the foundation for something larger than personal revenge. Ruby had transformed his protective instincts into a global mission of justice. And together, they would continue that mission for as long as vulnerable children needed protection from the predators who saw them as easy targets. Some legacies were built on money or property or reputation. The Morrison legacy was built on the bodies of those who preyed on the innocent. And it would continue growing, one eliminated threat at a time, for as long as evil people made the mistake of targeting those Vincent Morrison and his daughter considered worth protecting. In the end, love had proven to be the most dangerous force of all, because there was no limit to what Vincent Morrison would do for the people he loved, and no mercy he would show to those who threatened them. The mountains had taught him that some falls were final, and he'd spent his life ensuring that the right people did the falling. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.